Recording.
Okay. I'll start playing this anyway.
Yeah, we're ready to go. It's recording.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody to the November 2020 virtual SA meeting. Oh God, it's almost the end of 2020. I know I for one will be glad to see the end of it, as I think many of us will be. Yeah, thanks everyone. My name's Peter Howard. I'm the president of the Space Association, and this little shindig is brought to you by the Space Association of Australia. I'm just going to run through a quick program for tonight. We're going to start off with just a little bit of information about what's happening around the association. Between you and me, it's not much, but we're looking for 2021 to revive a lot of things. We're going to have a look at some space news with Marcus House. He's going to give us a detailed look at SpaceX Crew-1 and the Starship hop that has not yet hopped, but it's done a few other things. But anyway, Marcus House will be joining us at 7:45. And then we're going to have our feature speaker, Dr. Basil Tucker, speaking about necessity, the mother of invention, and how that relates to management control in the lessons from Apollo 13. And I'm so looking forward to this. So that'll kick off at about 8:05, and then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A at the end of that. You can ask your questions and comments, etc. Then we're going to flip over to Russia and have a look at the Russia crewed mission to Mars. I don't know whether it's spelled correctly, crewed or crude, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's with our Space Association member, Igor. He's a member and he's also the CEO of SpaceHansa Asia Pacific, which I don't know much about, and I think you have to have a secret code to understand what they do. And we'll have a Q&A with Igor as well. And then we're going to sort of finish off the formal, if you can call it formal, the structured part of the evening about 9:30. And if you've still got the stomach for it, we can hang around, and often people hang around till 10 or 10:30, just talking about whatever they want to talk about, perhaps asking questions of the speakers, and maybe making a few comments, etc. All right, and rather than using the chat in Zoom, we have found that to be too hard to sort of navigate, because a lot of people often have side conversations, which is great, but unfortunately from a perspective of presenters and Q&A, it's hard to scramble through and go back to questions that were asked. So we've got a link here to this Slido page, which is on your I think it's on your invitation, Mike, is that correct? On the invitation that you got to the meeting? Or if you go back to the actual website that's got the meeting details, you just follow a hyperlink to that Slido page. And I think Michael actually probably put it in the chat, in the Zoom chat window, which will then take you off to that separate website. So I'll be monitoring that as we go through, and Mike and the other people will be prompting me if I've left off any questions and comments. Ian asked about the AGM, our Space Association AGM, where we decide what we're going to spend all our multi-million dollars budget on, and how we're going to give it to, who we're going to give it to, and what the committee's international travel schedule will be, which is distant. So as with COVID affected everything else, we weren't able to run our AGM, and as it stands at this particular point, we've still got a deferral. Now, Ian raised before the possibility that we might have to be doing something else. I'm not sure. I think probably we'll defer that to the end of the meeting and have a discussion about that. I'm not sure whether John Coleman is here. He might join later on, but he might have some understanding about what John's the secretary of the Space Association. He's been dealing with the bureaucracy. But we do hope to have the AGM on a different night to a scheduled meeting, so it's a standalone thing, and we'll possibly have it. We'll have it possibly in a face-to-face meeting, but also have the ability for interstate members to join in virtually. But we've still got to nut out those dates and details. So we'll let you know. Now that restrictions are coming off in Victoria, looks like we'll probably end up doing it early in the US. So 2021, we're going to be going back to the pub. For those who are not familiar, we normally meet at the Golden Gate Hotel down in South Melbourne, upstairs there, and have dinner and a few drinks and our presentation. So we're going to be doing that actually, I've got some news on that, but at least in 2021, we'll be starting back there again, as long as everyone behaves themselves with this damn COVID. But before that, when our December meeting at this stage, and I've only just got semi-confirmation of it. Well, I got confirmation of it last week, but we wanted to wait till the announcement yesterday by the state government. We're going to have a face-to-face catch-up, not a meeting, catch-up on the 14th of December at the pub. Given the year that it's been and the fact that none of us have had a chance to even see each other in person for so long, we figured we're going to dispense with the usual presentation type thing and just get around and have a social kind of dinner. So, and the idea there would be you're more than welcome to bring spouses, partners, kids, grandparents, related space geeks, anyone you'd like to bring along. I'm just confirming with the venue. I think the state government guidelines now are like 300 people in the venue. Now, obviously, this pub wouldn't take that many, so there is still the people per square metre type limit. So I'm just getting from them what that particular number would be for that upstairs area that we meet in. So I'm thinking it's possibly 30 or 40, but we'll give you some more details about that as we come closer, as we get more detail, I should say. If it turns out that it's a relatively small number, we might have to have sort of a ticketed type of thing where we get people that are interested to go ahead and book to be at the dinner, because otherwise, if there's too many or not enough, it won't work. So you can understand what I'm trying to say. So we're not going to live stream that either. So as we'll probably have more details later this week, given that the state government only made their announcement yesterday. I suspect later this week we'll have a 100% plan nutted out for you, and we'll communicate that through the usual channels. But that would be great fun. For the meetings for the next year, we're going to stick with our formula of the fourth Monday of the month. So those dates are on the screen there for you. So first one for 2021 will be the 25th of January. And as usual, the December one will be a couple of weeks forward. For those who don't know, we're a non-profit, non-commercial, non-political group. We just run via our membership fees. So if you'd like to become a member, we'd love to have you along. Go to our website. You can join up online, pay online, renew your membership, revive your membership if it's lapsed, and join the party. So it looks like next year is going to be a good year. And for those people that are familiar with us, we do have or have been running special events over a number of years. When astronauts or key figures coming out, we usually try to grab them and build events around them. We had last year, the 2019, we had the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, had a big event around that. That was great. So actually, I think this year, this week is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 12. If memory's correct. All right, so we're just going to quickly touch on a couple of pages of space news. We've got a new head of Australian Space Agency. His name is Mr. Enrico Palermo, and he's currently the Chief Operating Officer of Virgin Galactic. So he'll replace Dr. Megan Clark in January. So he's graduated from the University of Western Australia with a Bachelor of Engineering, Bachelor of Science and Applied Mathematics. He's held several positions with the spaceship company, building the operations in the Mojave Desert in California. And the spaceship company is wholly owns aerospace manufacturing and development subsidiary of Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic. So with his pull, maybe he'll start getting us some Virgin Galactic flights out of Australia. Wouldn't that be cool? So he's, as I say, the Virgin Galactic CEO at this point. The Australian Space Awards happened last week. I'm not going to read all these names. These are different categories. The Academic of the Year is Alan Duffy. I'll let you read through some of those. Rising Star, Blake Nikolic from Black Sky Aerospace. And what else have we got? Some other people that we know. Gilmore Space has got a Business of the Year award. Stephen Despolitis for the Melbourne Space Program. Might have met Stephen, I can't remember. Going further along, the Industry Association Not-for-Profit of the Year, the Australian Youth Aerospace Association. We're going to put the Space Association in there for next year's awards. So there we go. Launch Business of the Year was Gilmore Space Technologies. Operations Business of the Year, Black Sky Aerospace. Yeah, some interesting names here. So, looks like a really good event and some worthy recipients there, by looks. So some other news, Hayabusa 2 re-entry capsule is going to land in Australia on December 6th. So that's a Japanese space explorer. It's completed a 5.1 billion kilometre journey and it'll parachute into Woomera. So the team from JAXA arrived last week. They've been in quarantine. And so the capsule will be released by Hayabusa in the upper atmosphere and parachute into the Woomera test range. Expected to land within a 100 or 150 kilometre area where it will send a radio signal that they will track. That was launched back in December 2014 and it arrived at Raidu in June 2018. So the Hayabusa means Peregrine Falcon, and it performed this delicate operation to take the samples in November 2019, a year ago. And after nearing Earth, it's going to drop the capsule off and it's going to fire, the Hayabusa 2 itself is going to fire its engines to adjust its course and maneuver past the Earth and continue its exploration of the solar system. So that's going to be cool. Must be they can reuse a space vehicle. So this is their second one they've parachuted into Australia. The Hayabusa 1 came back in 2010. I know it's Australian space news in this New Zealand, but we're gonna grab them anyway. So Rocket Lab took a step toward getting reusable launch vehicles after it had a safe splashdown and recovery of its electron booster after this week's mission. This week's launch, I should say. Peter Beck, the CEO, announced last year that they would attempt to recover these boosters using its own method, which instead of the SpaceX fire up the booster, send it back to the platform or the launch area and descend safely on a rocket engine. The Rocket Lab concept is to descend via parachute and be intercepted by a helicopter. So they've done a couple of tests with that. It seems to work. So yeah, if it works, it's great. They didn't attempt to do that helicopter recovery at this stage, but they did manage to get the stage on its parachute and into the water. And they also managed to launch a gnome into space as well. I don't know the purpose of that, but why not? Always good. So this is a picture of the booster after it landed in the water. So obviously it looks relatively intact. I doubt if they'd be able to put some more fuel in at this stage and fire it up again, but it looks like it's sustained, minimal damage. And the most important part, it survived the re-entry back in the atmosphere and got to the speed where it could be on a parachute. So that's a huge achievement. Well done to them. Some global space news. Now, just a heads up, I'm going to touch on a couple of SpaceX things that Marcus is going to elaborate on further, but I'm just going to touch on these and I'll let Marcus elaborate. He's far more knowledgeable on these things than I. So SpaceX, the Crew-1, NASA Crew-1 mission took off last week and docked with the ISS. So they named the capsule Resilience, and it took off at 11:27 on the 16th of November. So that was Michael Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and along with the JAXA astronaut Tsuichi Noguchi. So they started the Expedition 64. So it's the first operational mission to the ISS. We had the first crewed mission, but that was basically a proving test mission, although they stayed up there for a number of months. The launch date was delayed several times from the original date of 2016. So they're expecting to have it up there for 180 days, and they'll return in May of next year at some point. And this is a picture of them about to dock with the ISS. It looks very, very 2001, although it's 2020. Now, there is an Australian connection. This is the crew of the Crew-1 mission, and the female on the left-hand side is Shannon Walker. She's married to Australian-born but now American citizen astronaut Andy Thomas. But there's a little Australian link there for you all. The booster came back and landed on the drone ship. Seemed to be quite nice and normal landing, and it was quite good. It was a nighttime landing, but by the time we got back to port, it had a noticeable lean on it. It was seemingly in good shape, but it seemed to slide across the deck. Apparently, they experienced high winds and rough seas on the way back in before they were able to secure it with the octo grabber, which is what we use to secure to the deck of the drone ship. So it appears that it's in relatively good condition, apart from the fact that it's slid across the deck a bit and is leaning. And this is a nice aero shot which I managed to find. So you can see it landed roughly in the middle of the platform, but that rough weather and strong winds had it slide across. But fortunately, it didn't tip over the edge. So obviously, they'll do all of their assessments to find out if it's going to be suitable and get for reuse. So this is a close-up of the octo grabber. You can hopefully see those arms that sort of reach up from the deck and grab onto the support structures there to hold it in position for the trip back to the port. Now, the original plan was that NASA had agreed that they would use this booster for the Crew-2 mission. Once again, they'll make the assessment on the booster itself and find out if, in fact, it's flight-worthy and up to standard, hasn't sustained any damage. But at this stage, apparently the preliminary review looks like it's okay. They do have another backup one, the booster that launched the Sentinel-6 Michael Ferrici mission just the other day. So apparently they can use that booster if this one's a bit bent. Some update on the Boeing Starliner. They're going to be redoing their unmanned test mission. It's now pushed to 2021. So they're addressing 80 problems found by the NASA Boeing Independent Review Team. So NASA designated the test of last December to December 2019 as a high visibility close call. So you don't want to be riding that. So the reflight's going to be known as Orbital Flight Test 2. They're doing it no cost to NASA. Well, I'm sure they'll get it another way. Don't you worry about that, knowing Boeing. But it won't happen until the first quarter of 2021 at this stage. So they're now talking about the orbital flight test. Oh, that's the same one. Sorry about that. The most recent timeline from NASA released back in September had the Boeing flying the OF2 next month. They're now looking like the first crewed test flight with Nicole Mann, Michael Fink, Barry Wilmore to nowhere in June. And then the first operational flight with Sunita Williams, John Casada, Jeanette Epps, plus a fourth passenger that I haven't announced yet. I'm not telling you one, but I've got my name in that. So next December, I might not make the meeting. So that's December 2021. SLS continues to grind on with its big pace. So their core stage green run campaign for December. They've got 2 more tests to try and to get that all done. They had to repair one of the liquid oxygen pre-valves inside one of the engines. So they wet dress rehearsal now, which is when they'll fuel everything up, but not actually fire the engines. They're talking about December 7. And if that goes well, then they'll do the hot fire test, which I think is an 8-minute hot fire engine test in December 21. So it's a nice fireworks in time for Christmas if that comes off. So it's at the B2 test stand in Stennis in southern Mississippi, and once that happens, they'll then ship it across to Florida. So the failure of the pre-valve in engine 4 was discovered in the previous green run test. They had to do some surgical clutch replacement, fully reconstructed valve assembly, pass-through test, etc. So they'll obviously do these wet tests to find out how it works. So we'll see how that one goes. Once again, I'm touching on Marcus's space here, but the Starship SN8 hop has not yet been completed, and they had some problems with static test fire, and thanks to a burst disk, they avoided damaging pop scenario. They're saying it might still fly this month, but maybe a different trio of engines. First, this test involved the first ever flying of a Raptor engine via the 2 header tanks, one of which, the LOX header tank, being located at the nose cone's tip. And previous Starship prototypes, Pathfinder Mark 1, have been tested without this nose cone and therefore a different configuration. That test went to plan as near a repeat, however, just this time 2 Raptors were lit, just one before. Sparks could be seen flying during the ignition, however, this time it's expected, as it was expected based on the experience of the first test, what wasn't expected was a stream of molten liquid dripping from the bottom of one of the engine nozzles on the pad. So there was clearly something going on there. And once again, Marcus will give us more detail. So Elon Musk reckons they lost some vehicle pneumatics, reason unknown. So I'll leave that now. I'll let Marcus pick up on that story. So we've got a new president. Yeah, that's could be a statement or could be a question, but I think it's a new one. So here's our space policy, where to now. So the Office of the President-elect, Joe Biden, he's doing everything he can with all the limitations being placed upon him. I'm sure you might be familiar with all of those obstructions that the current administration is putting in his way. But he's moving ahead. He's established a transition team, but there's some late breaking information from Donald Trump, which I thought I would share for you today that's come through. So apparently he won, according to his information. Sorry about that. Okay, so basically, President-elect Biden named an 8-person NASA transition team. And he's done this for all the different departments, the Defense Department, the various other departments. So he's got an agency review team with 5 women and 3 men, and includes former scientists and a former astronaut. And they're on a voluntary basis. The agency review teams are responsible for understanding the operations of each agency, ensuring a smooth transfer of power, preparing the President-elect Biden by putting Harris and their cabinet to hit the ground running on day 1. If you want to have a look at that transition document, it's at this website here. I will make a note, it's not on here on the slide, but Jim Bridenstine, the current NASA administrator, has declined to put his name forth to be the administrator under Biden. He just stated that he felt that new administration needs a new administrator. So, despite the fact that a lot of people thought he was doing a great job and would possibly continue to do so. But anyway, that's his decision. I won't go through every name, but I'll just put the names up here on the screen for you. So quite a nice, diverse group of people with diverse skills, including Pam Melroy, who's a 3-time space shuttle astronaut, including at least one of which she commanded. She's also a director of space technology and policy at Nova Systems Australia. So she spends quite a lot of time, well, pre-COVID, quite a bit of time out here in Australia working with Nova Systems. And I think she's been also very actively involved in setting up and ramping up of the Australian Space Agency. So Pam's been a real friend of Australia. Other names, oh, what those lines are. Is someone drawing on that? These lines on my screen. I don't know how that works. So there's those other names there. I'm not going to go through them all. Hey, Ash.
It's a hacker. It's a hacker.
Someone's writing on the screen on my view, but can you see it on the?
Yeah, I can see it.
I've seen that before. It's a hacker. A hacker got in.
All right. Well,
I don't know who though.
you're having I love you. We love your intelligent contribution. Thanks very much. I'm going to keep going now. So one other announcement that they made in their transition team was former astronaut Catherine Sullivan. Although she won't be working in the NASA transition team, you're going to see her on the Department of Commerce team. So she threw on 3 space shuttle missions as well. All right, so as I mentioned before, the last gathering for 2020 and our first physical meeting since February will be on Monday the 14th of December at the Golden Gate Hotel in South Melbourne. I'm sorry for those people that are out of interstate or a long way from Melbourne, but if you're able to get here, come on down. They do a nice Parmigiano and a nice beer, so might be worth the trip. Lots of public transport down there. We will send our details via our media and emails and things like that, all the details as we come through. Ash, are you able to do anything about that stuff, or is it going to stay there?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out.
Right. At least there hasn't been any more, unless that person decides they want to have more fun. Now, just to, we have had, the last time we had our meeting at the Golden Gate, it's a really nice evening, and we sit down and have a beer and a meal. And actually, this is a picture of me at the last meeting we had in February, actually, with one of our friends there. So it is a formal event, so you do need to dress up in your best clobber. All right. I'm very pleased to have Marcus House join us tonight to give us that update I was talking before. Marcus is an internet sensation, and he's got a YouTube channel and puts out, as you can see, pumps out lots of videos and information in a very entertaining manner. I did this about 3 months ago, and he had 180,000 subscribers. It's probably doubled that by now. I'll let Marcus elaborate on that. But this is Marcus's self-described biography. He was born back in '72. His kids, I don't know. So obviously a big fan of Kerbal Space and all the activities, the new space, I suppose, SpaceX Crew-1, etc., etc. So with that, I'm going to unshare, whatever it is, and I'll just share this one through. I'll do this. Right. Now I'm going back here. Stop sharing. And Marcus, I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. How you going, everybody?
Yeah, and I'll mute myself. Great, thanks.
That's good. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I haven't really tested my microphone out this evening, so hopefully we're all good there. Thanks for the introduction. That's why it makes me feel a little bit paranoid that I'm underselling myself, really, because it's I'm just a dude that sits in my office a lot, actually. So yeah, hi everybody. I make a lot of YouTube videos on SpaceX and NASA, pretty much everything actually that's news related, but there's certainly a core focus on what's going on with SpaceX, especially with the latest Crew-1 mission, especially with everything Starship related, because it drives such a lot of excitement, given that it's got the potential there to really revolutionize how the space industry works. Lowering that cost of getting mass to orbit really is the whole whole dream behind that. And Elon Musk quite frequently talks about lowering that cost by orders of magnitude, even compared to something like the Falcon 9, which is already incredibly cheap when you compare it to almost every other launch provider in terms of how much mass it can deliver to orbit. So that's why we're so excited about it. And although I'm not hugely prepared for a big talk, I think it's probably going to be good to open up for questions and answers. So if you want to just drop some questions for me in the with Slido, isn't it? Is that right, Peter? Yeah. We can go through some of those things as well. I might actually share. I might share my other screen now. I don't exactly know what I'm doing because I will admit I am a Zoom noob. So we'll see how we go here. Let me just bring up some imagery. See if that works for me. Okay, hopefully we can see that, can we? Yep. So, we'll talk about a few things. Obviously, the Crew-1 launch has been incredibly inspiring, I think, for so many around the world. It's not just me individually or the real space nuts out there. It actually has inspired so many people, and that all led, of course, from the Demo 2 mission back in the middle of the year. But a week ago, obviously, up was sent the 4 awesome astronauts, and one from JAXA, obviously Soichi Noguchi. Incredibly awesome guy, very, very interesting guy to watch. He's just this kind of, he's almost a comedian as far as the crew goes. So I think that's really inspiring as well to see a lot of that personality come back into it. So often in the past with these more official missions, everyone's been very down the line, very, very composed. Whereas these guys, they just seem to be able to open up a lot more. And I might just actually bring up some of the shots from my video the other week, because I think it's interesting to actually watch. So obviously we had the crew launch there. That was all done on time. They had a few little issues with a couple of leaks around the doors when they were being sealed in, but that didn't delay anything too much. There was a couple of little concerning issues after they got to orbit in regards to the heaters. It actually didn't really get a lot of news coverage, but there was a little bit of a worry there around some of the heating wasn't quite working correctly, but they got that resolved as well, and they were obviously on their way. With the entire mission, I think, and as you were saying before there, Peter, Jim Bridenstine's planning to step down under the new government, regardless of what people think of the new transition. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are toing and froing about the voting system over there. I'm not even going to get into that, but assuming that the election plays out as it appears that it has done already, Jim Bridenstine will be stepping down. And I think that's a little sad in a way. I understand why. I was very skeptical of Jim Bridenstine when he was first put into that position. And he has almost at every turn surprised me. And I think he's actually revived the enthusiasm for the commercial space side of things. Before that, there was a lot of debate about whether these sorts of missions should go to companies like SpaceX. And I think that's, for understandable reason, there's the status quo that's always been around since the first missions were running. But when it comes down to it, I think it's important that these things can evolve, and Jim Bridenstine certainly had a big part to play in that. A couple of interesting facts about the mission is it was apparently the first 4-person capsule flight in the United States that had, in general anyway, so it's the first time that's ever been done. And also it's going to be the longest flight of a United States capsule since 1973 and Skylab 4, which was up in orbit for 84 days, or that mission was up there for 84 days. So this is going to be much longer, up there for 6 months or so. Now, obviously, there was lengthy missions with the space shuttle. None of them were quite that long, as far as I understand. And that's including the full 7 crew up there at the moment. So it's a very packed International Space Station right now, which I think is quite interesting. Just skimming through a couple of shots there. Just some things I found quite interesting was a little demonstration there of the of how to drink in space with Shannon there, showing how you do a twirl of the bottle to sort of get the momentum of the liquid going in, so you can sort of pop it in your mouth, suck the liquid down without it sort of floating around. Sort of very similar, I guess, how reaction control systems are used if you want to restart an engine in orbit after it's been sort of sitting stationary for a while. So I think a lot of those things bring some of that information down to earth for people. What was really interesting, I think, as well, is that the live streams were just absolutely killing the records, I believe, in terms of the enthusiasm for it all. I've got a picture here in the video somewhere. There was just so many people all over the world watching these things, millions across both SpaceX's live streams and NASA's live streams. Again, getting more enthusiasm for the entire industry. So it's just a really nice thing to see. And I was quite inspired by it. I didn't expect to be quite as moved by it as I was with the Demo 2 mission. I think that was a real groundbreaking thing. Obviously, that was the first ever launch with humans on board for SpaceX. So there was a lot of emotion around that one. But to actually see the first official crew mission with Crew-1 here with the 4 astronauts again, that's a bigger feat as it stands, I think, and it's just something I think again that we can all be inspired by. So yes, they're all up there at the space station now. I haven't heard a great deal about how things are going, but very soon after we had a Russian spacewalk going on. That was quite fun to watch last week. I'll just switch the shot there. So there's the there's the 7 all up there on the International Space Station. That's a very big crew, and you've also got to think about sometimes what it would actually be like, especially if you haven't been up there before, such as Victor there. Victor, he got his little space pin, the little gold space pin, which means that he has broken the 100 kilometer or 100 mile, I forget which, altitude mark. So he gets a pin for that, and they celebrated that on the way up. So I think that's a nice little story. Another thing that I think is quite interesting is that the Dragon spacecraft that is going to be going up in a few weeks' time, that's the first ever cargo Dragon that's got the ability to autonomously dock as well, very similar to what we saw with this mission that's just gone. Obviously, there's no people on board this one. But what's quite interesting about this is it's for the first time ever, there's going to be 2 Dragons at the same time docked to the International Space Station. And it's actually going to be docked on the PMA, I think it's PMA 3. So we're going to see a Dragon here. Obviously, this is the Crew Dragon that's up there now, and there's going to be another Dragon docked to the PMA docking port there. So that's really quite exciting because there's, again, there's more firsts going on, and there's apparently going to be, even after the Crew Dragon is released and they come home in roughly 6 months' time, that's actually going to have there's going to be a Dragon up there at the same time. So there should be a Dragon docked basically for the next 12 months, regardless of whether it's a Crew Dragon or a cargo Dragon. So yeah, SpaceX is just breaking all these wonderful little records there for themselves, and I think that's just really neat to show. So yeah, and like I said, we had the Russian spacewalk there the other day. They had a couple of little issues with the walk. They got most of their objectives done, but they were out there for roughly 6 or 7 hours or something like that. So huge walk. And both of the guys named Sergei Rishchikov and Sergei Kutspechkov, which I'm sure I just massacred. But that was again a very cool little thing to happen, and this was just after really the guys from Crew-1 got there, the guys and girls got there. So yeah, very awesome mission, and we're obviously watching that very closely to see everything going on. But in terms of Starship updates, it's been a while since we've really had update here. And as I present with these videos so often, we make a bit of a summary of what's happened over the course of the last week or so. But you can always go back to sort of see how it's evolved since then. And the one thing that is interesting about that, oops, sorry, I've just ended up sitting in an ad. Let's skip that. Exactly as you said, Peter, and you've touched on some of these things already. The Starship serial number 8 has been ready to go here for what seems like a few months now. And I know it's frustrating Elon Musk quite a bit because he wants to get these things moving. And there's all these little delays. So the latest delay is that they did a static fire with 2 of the Raptor engines. And those 2 engines, one of the engines, I should say, smashed out some of the concrete. It's got an interesting coating called Martite, I think it was, which is some sort of ceramic filled epoxy type thing, and it basically broke off big shards of that, sent it flying up into the engine bay, which severed a few of the important cables there for avionics and pneumatics and that sort of thing. So there was a big question mark as to whether the Starship was going to survive fully at that point, because it meant that they couldn't detank the header tank. And the header tank, if I bring it up here, oops, I've got too many things open already. So we've got Starship SN8 here, and let's see if I can zoom it in a little bit. So there's actually a couple of header tanks. The bottom tank area is all liquid oxygen up to about here somewhere. And there's actually a header tank. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not. There's a header tank around the center, and that holds the liquid methane. And there's another header tank in the very top nose up here. So what happened was the pneumatics failed, and basically the header tank there was building up pressure. They couldn't release the pressure. So as it's filled with liquid oxygen, as it warms up, it starts to expand. And there was that little question mark as to whether the burst disc, which is fitted in here somewhere, whether that burst disc would would actually fail, which is what it's intending to do. Obviously, that's what it's for. But the hope was, we hope that this disc fails before the actual entire nose ruptures, because that could have, exploded and fallen down and probably exploded the bottom tank as well. Who knows what it could have done? So that set them back several weeks. And we're still waiting on we're still waiting on this 15-kilometer flight, which hasn't been done before. With the last one we saw was the static fire, and I don't think we've sort of seen this at all. And this is let me just get this ready. I don't know if the frame rate will probably be awful, but essentially the SN6 here, that took to the sky, a number of months ago now, just a month after the SN5 version did. This one was a lot smoother. It was just a much more controlled looking flight. And that it's just amazing to see. You've got this single Raptor engine that can just lift this huge heavy Starship prototype there. That one obviously didn't have the nose cone, but it did have a little piece on the top there that is essentially a ballast. So that's roughly a 20-ton weight on the top of it. So that gives you an idea on how powerful just one of these engines are. And they fired 2 of them in this latest test, I believe, and they fired them both point blank into the concrete. And it's raised a lot of questions. If we can't have the engine bay of the Starship protected when it's on very toughly made concrete with this Martite stuff, how could we expect it to land on a place like Mars in the dirt and just not throw up some colossal amount of, it's basically just digging a hole as it tries to land. So with little legs and things like that, there's a few question marks there going, well, how's that going to work if they can't do it? You'd have to be able to find a landing zone that's incredibly tough rock. And even then, you've got essentially 200 tons of force available there by the Raptor engine down here, and there's 2 of them, so essentially 400 tons worth of force just with 2 engines. Then add another engine, there's going to be 3, so 600 tons of force. So I think, geez, that would dig a pretty good hole if you were landing on something even remotely soft. Even hard rock, I would say, would start to rip that apart pretty easy. So that's going to be interesting, I think, seeing how that plays out, especially with the small legs that they've got at the moment. So yeah, that's kind of the news with what's going on there. We hope that the 15-kilometer flight will be, we're still hoping it could be before the end of the month. We're not sure about that. There's road closures scheduled for that. And they are currently, if I actually bring up the more recent ones, they're currently still scheduled in for the 30th, and there's some more. I'll just put them on screen here for a second. So that's what it currently looks like at the moment in terms of the testing dates. So typically, where we see a primary date, that'll be the first attempt at something like a static fire. And then the secondary dates there are actually mapped out for the backups, essentially. So we've got another primary date there for November 30th. That is when we're hoping that there will be a actual flight, that 15-kilometer flight. And of course, the reason that that's such a huge highlight that people are looking forward to is that it's the first time that they're ever going to test the Starship here with these aero surfaces. So the idea is that it's going to do that belly flop landing. It's going to, belly down. First it's going to fly to the 15 kilometers, cut its engines. It's going to use those 4 aero surfaces, the 2 in the nose and the 2 in the aft there. And it's going to glide down and then finally flip over and land. So there's a lot of firsts in that one. And I believe that there's a bit of skepticism even inside SpaceX at the moment as to whether that's going to succeed. I know there has been a number of comments even from Elon Musk saying that there's a reasonable expectation that it's going to not make that. And also, of course, it's the first time that there is ever going to be 3 Raptor engines fire together. Again, that's 600 tons roughly of force, maybe a little bit less with these more prototype engines, but the potential is there for 600 tons worth of force, perhaps even more in the future by quite a margin. So, this little thrust structure that's in the bottom of the tank here, that's got to hold a hell of a lot of force to protect against all that power. And of course, the entire vessel has to be able to fall over on its belly, come down through the atmosphere. Will it crumple? Will it break in half? Who knows? It's going to be a hell of a exciting thing to find out and watch. Regardless of whether it's successful, it's certainly going to be entertaining one way or another. So yeah, that's largely what's going on in the whole story of SN8. But I just thought I'd show a nice little diagram of a wonderful guy that I work with, Brendan Lewis. He helps me a lot with the videos that I make, and also does a lot of stuff for the community with these diagrams. And this gives us a current idea. It's probably a few days out of date now. Things move so fast down at Boca Chica, Texas. This gives us a bit of an idea where things are at. So obviously SN5, SN6 over on the left there have already flown. SN8 is waiting to fly. SN9 is actually not far away from being in the same sort of status as SN8. So as soon as SN8 flies, SN9 will actually be about ready to fly itself, potentially. There's a lot of question as to whether they're actually going to move SN9 down to the pad fully constructed, because what happened with SN8 was they moved the tank portions of it. So, this if you have a look at SN9 there's the tank portion of it with the aft fins that got moved down in one piece, and then they took the nose down later and constructed it on the launch stand. We're thinking this time around they'll actually construct it all and move the entire thing down in this massive self-propelled modular transporter, which is a bit of a beastly sort of thing of its own. And yeah, it's quite interesting sort of watching the whole story of SN9 play out right now, because there's a few new things with that. Heat shield tiles that they're really working on trying to nut out. The heat shield tiles alone are a little bit they're a little bit of an interesting story, because obviously as the Starship needs to re-enter the atmosphere, and we're talking about orbital velocity here is the ultimate goal. You need to be able to re-enter with these heat shield tiles, very similar, I guess, to what used to happen with the shuttle. The difference is they're trying to actually make this heat shield out of sort of these modular hexagonal sort of tiles, very different to the way they were fastened. These sorts of things were fastened with the space shuttle. Space shuttle was all very much adhesive and all this sort of thing, and these are all essentially mounted on pins in a way, but they have had a certain number of issues with that. So yes, that's interesting as well. Each time they do one of these tests, we'll see a bunch of them all cracked and stuff, and it's like, well, if it can't make it through a little 150-meter flight, I don't know if it's going to handle orbital velocity. So that's going to be interesting to see if they nail this, because that's obviously a big part of the story. If they need to have these re-entry systems in place as well. So there's all sorts of these parallel little stories going on that we like to keep up to date with, and that sort of
thing. Marcus.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. We're going for hours, but we're running out of time. We've actually run over time.
Oh, right.
When SN9, when it flies, could we get you back to give us a detailed look at that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Yeah,
definitely.
Right.
Yeah. No, there's
all
a
right.
lot
Well,
with
just
SN8
in the
and
interest of trying to keep it a reason, well, we're already 20 minutes late anyway, so I do apologise for that, everybody. It's fascinating, and I could sit here for hours, but we've got our other speakers, so we've just got to try and get everyone on board because obviously they've taken the time to join us. Thanks, Marcus. We do appreciate that.
No problem at all.
We'll speak again soon. Once again, everybody, go ahead and subscribe to Marcus's YouTube channel, and you get all the details and more than what we were able to get for you tonight. So, Marcus, if I get you to unshare your screen.
Yes.
And then we will hand over to Basil, if Basil hasn't left the building, hopefully. So, yeah, everyone, I'd like to introduce Dr. Basil Tucker, who is the Senior Lecturer at the University of New South Wales Business School. He's also the Associate Editor of the British Accounting Review, Editorial Board Member of Accounting, Auditing and Accounting Journal, Editorial Board Member of Journal of Accounting and Organisational Change, and Editorial Board Member of the Accounting Forum. With that, I'll just hand it over to you, Basil, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, and I will go ahead and mute myself. For those people who have asked questions on Slido, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Just in the interest of time, we might push those back to the end of the presentations and have well, we'll see how we go. We might do that. So, Basil, over to you. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody for firstly having me join you and talk about this research that I've done, which has been published only a month ago in the Journal of Management Accounting Research, which is one of the top management accounting academic research journals. But also I was lucky enough, fortunate enough, and had the timing to go to NASA in January in Houston, and I presented this, and there's a YouTube clip which I think, Peter, I've sent to you, which might be available to people, but it is publicly available on YouTube. So if you've got problems with insomnia, I'd encourage you to look at that. Might be a cure for it. It will be, given that I'm the one who's talking. So this is the very much the presentation I gave to NASA in January, before COVID, before I'd heard about COVID at least. And it's looking at, it's very much historical research in many ways. It's looking at the relationship between management control and creativity. So it's a management control type paper, which is looking at how can we reconcile the use of control as well as creativity in an organizational context, in a project context, in virtually any context. We think that the Apollo 13 mission has probably got a number of lessons that we could learn as a consequence of what happened. Let me tell you about the motivation for the research. I mean, there were three real motivators. Firstly, I've been a space nerd for as long as I can remember. It's something I'm sure you guys can all identify with. primarily the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions, because for me, that's where the action sort of happened. But things are starting to hot up, as we've just seen from Marcus's presentation, and there are exciting times coming back to the space community. Secondly, the paper is timely because this year was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13. I know NASA had a lot of events planned for this year, but COVID sort of killed them. Luckily, this one got in. It was the first of some of their planned events. I'm not sure how many others managed to get off the ground. The third, if you like, motivation for doing this research is that the idea of control and creativity is somewhat unresolved. There's this sort of idea that inherently we seem to think that we either are very controlling or we're very creative, but having control and creativity simultaneously doesn't seem to make a lot of intuitive sense. So we've got a few things to say about this. Why use Apollo 13? Well, it's a crisis that occurred where the need for control and creativity was literally a matter of life and death. If they couldn't exercise control as well as come up with novel, innovative and creative solutions to the problems which presented themselves, we would have had 3 astronauts who would have died. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. So management control processes, creative solutions were both required in the recovery and safe return of the 3 astronauts. Interestingly, the accident, the Apollo 13 mission, has been analyzed from a whole lot of different perspectives: engineering, aerospace, disaster response, org culture, human resources, public administration, but never from the perspective of control, which is odd to me. The very organizational unit responsible for orchestrating and operating the missions is mission control, as you'd all know. But yet from a control point of view, Apollo 13 hasn't been, certainly to our knowledge, myself and my 2 co-authors, Ian Halkett and A.D. James, we're unaware of any sort of control references or control studies. So I'm throwing around these terms, control and creativity. It's probably a good idea that I should at least establish what I'm talking about. Control, I like to think of control as the systems, very broadly, the systems, the processes that seek to bring order to organizational or project efforts. So something that brings order. Creativity, the production of novel ideas. I think the diagrams there say it better than I could. Knowledge is really getting the dots on the board. Experience is connecting the dots. Creativity is connecting them in a way that shows us something, tells us a story, shows a picture that we would otherwise not see. Innovation, on the other hand, is simply the implementation of those creative ideas, or as Theodore Levitt, who's a management writer, says, creativity is thinking up new things. Innovation is doing new things. We're looking at the thinking up, especially because the time frame of Apollo 13 was very compressed. Creativity and innovation basically coincided, as I'm sure many of you would be more than aware. So as I've said, we've looked at, as a control researcher, so I'm certainly an accountant and my specialization is management control. I'm thinking, well, I can also marry my professional interest in control with my personal interest in space. And from a control point of view, we've looked at control and creativity in teams, in terms of new products, in terms of organizational survival, organizational resilience, productivity. I could go on and on. I think there's probably another couple of hours discussion in these areas. But most recently, we've looked at the nexus between control and creativity in a number of different, I guess, settings. So we're looking at creativity and control. We're looking at the compatibility between those two ideas. We're looking at the situations in which control systems, management control systems can create the optimal setting for creativity or the use of creativity, and so on and so forth. What seems to be most pronounced in all of these studies is resolution of this idea of an inherent tension between control and creativity. As I was saying before, there seems to be a tug of war. We have one or the other. And in fact, the jury seems to be out on whether we can use control simultaneously with creativity. Can we use both? Or is it a case of never the twain shall meet? Rather than look at creativity or control, we think it's probably more realistic, more practical to look at a range of control states and a range of creativity options that organizations, and I say organizations, but as I said, we can also talk about projects. So we can talk about our own personal life, if you like. It's not just restricted to organizational contexts. So we can have a range of control, a range of creativity options. It's not an either or proposition. It's not a zero-sum game, but rather it's a spectrum, a range of different control and creativity. A lot of control, a small amount of control. A lot of creativity, a small amount of creativity. Seems to have been almost overlooked in certainly in the research, the academic research that's been done in this area. Our research, let me explain, at least clarify what our research was designed to do. As I said, it was primarily historical, archival. We're looking back on Apollo 13, and we're saying, well, what can we learn from this mission, from this particular space flight? So we went to the NASA documentation. There's like inches and inches of documentation, mission transcripts, the mission's operations reports, the oral history transcripts from the Johnson Space Center, the Courtright report, the report of the official investigation into the Apollo 13 flight by the review board. We looked at media reports and other publicly available data, but we also spoke to a number of industry, I like to think of them as experts, but there's certainly people who know a little bit about space. In fact, they know a lot about space. I've got pictures of them here. You'd recognize some of them, probably most of them. Amy Shura-Teitel. She's a competitor of yours, Marcus. She has a YouTube channel, which I think many people would be aware of, Vintage Space, and other channels as well. She's very much very well read in the area of Apollo history. Isaac Arthur, who's a physicist who also has his own YouTube channel. Howard McCurdy, who's a professor of public policy at the American University. Roger Launius, who was the NASA historian in the 1960s. Bill Barry, who up until late last year was the NASA historian at the moment. We also interviewed Christopher Pine as the previous science as well as defense minister, Charlie Kamara and Andy Thomas, who were also good enough to speak to us. They were, as you know, astronauts or former astronauts at NASA. And of course, Jerry Griffin, who was one of the flight directors on the Apollo 13 mission and was a flight director on every manned Apollo mission. Jerry was very generous with his time and advice on our deliberations, interpretations, and what we came up. Let's look once again at this idea of a range of control options or control states and a range of creativity states. So when we're talking about management control, what we're really saying is, to what extent do users draw on the system to support their work? It refers to the different purposes to which control information is used, the number of controls, the type of controls, the tightness with which we use these controls. In contrast, we're in terms of creativity, we're looking at environments, information-rich environments, which encourages, which inspires employees to pursue creative actions. And again, in both instances, there's an implicit recognition on our part that there's a range of options. It's not an either or situation. So we have a potentially a high degree of control use. We have a low degree of control use. We have a high degree of creativity. We have a low degree of creativity. We can juxtapose these two concepts, these two ideas, and come up with a graph or a matrix, which academics like to do. And they're also very colorful, which looks very nice. And we have 4 broad control creativity styles. Routine standardization, a low amount of control, a low use of control, a low amount of creativity. Direction, where we have a high amount of control and a small amount of scope for creativity. Or empowerment, where we have a high degree of creativity with a small amount of control. Or innovation, which requires both a high degree of control and a high degree of creativity. Now, our job in this research was to say, can we find examples of each of these 4 main control styles? And then we went back to our interviewees and said, look, we've come up with this from the literature, from the publications, from the documents. This is our interpretation. What do you all think? Have we got it right? Have we got it wrong? Could you add to it? This is what they said. Well, this is what they came up with. Well, I'll talk about what they came up with shortly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm happy to do so in the question time. Most of us would know, most of you would know, probably better than me, the story of Apollo 13. If you've seen the movie, it's there's only about 3 or 4 areas in which it differs from reality. Apparently, it's very close to reality. So Apollo 13 launches at 13 minutes past 1, 13:13, the 11th of April, 1970 from Cape Canaveral. There's an anomaly, a second stage engine shuts down early, but the other 4 engines compensate for that. That's not a problem as such. What was a problem was 55 hours into the mission, the well-documented situation where Jack Swigert went and stirred the tanks on instruction from mission control, and we ended up with an explosion and unfortunately a command module which looks a bit like this. Hopefully you can see my cursor. Game has changed. So NASA asked, faced with a series of questions, primarily how are we going to get the astronauts safely back to Earth? The moon is out of the question. Walking on the moon is out of the question. How do we preserve our consumables? How are we going to get rid of carbon dioxide? These were essentially the 3 questions that needed to be solved as a matter of urgency. So, okay, I won't belabor this point, the need to, or the decision to adopt a circumlunar orbit rather than a direct abort or U-turn, as it were, the need to power down the command module, to power up the lunar module, to use the lunar module as a lifeboat, as it were, and the need to adapt the air scrubber from the command module to the lunar module, making a square peg go into a round hole, essentially. We know the happy ending of the mission, the successful jettison of the service module, the powering up of the command module, the transfer of the crew from the lunar module back into the command module, the successful separation of the command module and the lunar module Aquarius, and the re-entry, successful re-entry, even though for a few minutes there, it did seem somewhat harrowing, was somewhat harrowing, with a radio blackout of 6 rather than 3 to 4 minutes. So a happy ending. Let me go back to our control creativity options, look at each of these styles that we've suggested should be observable. The routine standardization, low control, low creativity. Most missions, most of the Apollo missions, Gemini missions, Mercury missions were run on procedures. Everything was procedure driven. So just about everything up to stirring the cryo tank was routinized, which was standardized, which was written down, literally written down in procedures. These were routine, standardized, low control, low creativity. Not that control wasn't important, but the idea of standardized procedures replaced the active use of control. Our second control style, direction, the high use of control, the low ability to exhibit creativity, was shown in a number of, I guess, events or situations. The replacement of Ken Mattingly by Jack Swigert. As we'll remember, Mattingly was found to have German measles, or been exposed, I'm sorry, to, he's actually never had German measles, but he was exposed to German measles, created a potential risk, and Mission Control said, right, you're off the team. Deke Slayton said, you're off the team. Swigert is actually coming off the interchange bench to take your place. This was not negotiable. It was not something up for discussion. There was no creativity. It was quite directive in terms of control, as were the procedures for docking of the command module, the lunar module, the separation of the modules, and the procedures for course corrections and re-entry. This was not really something that we could be too creative about. It was quite directive and quite control driven, literally. The idea of creativity with a low degree of control, there were some examples of this that we saw as well. I think the permitting the astronauts to remove their medical sensors was a very good, very illustrative and colourful example of this. So remember, and Jim Lovell talks about this in his book, he's getting a bit tired of the entire world knowing what his blood pressure and heart rate is, so he removes his sensors, medical sensors. Back on Earth, Mission Control are looking, monitoring the vital signs, the medical information that they do with all astronauts, and they suddenly see a flat line. And on inquiry, they find that Jim tells them that he's removed his sensors. Of course, the Capcom is not sure what to do about this, looks at Gene Kranz, who shrugs his shoulders, and Capcom says to Jim Lovell, that's okay, Jim. And of course, the other two astronauts, Fred Hayes, Jack Swigert, did the same thing. So there was a degree of creativity involved. The delegation of all control to the flight director. This was standard in Apollo missions. In the paper we talk about, and in the book, in his book, Lovell talks about the priority for passive thermal control maneuvers, rotating the spacecraft, as taking priority over power conservation as well as sleep. That's something that Gene Kranz insisted upon. The use of both control and high uses of creativity, high degrees of creativity as well as control. These are unprecedented situations which required out-of-the-box thinking, but a lot of control in implementation. So the formulation was new, was innovative, was creative. The implementation had to be controlled to the letter. the use of the lunar module as a lifeboat, the taking the white team, Gene Kranz's team, to become the tiger team, which was problem solving. The use of the lunar module rather than the service module engine for propulsion. These are all things that have never been done before and quite creative and needed off on the real time, I guess, thinking on the fly. So what does it mean? What does it mean in practical terms? What does it mean? Well, an organization which is very procedure driven and planned in just about every way is all very well, but as Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. As Jim Lovell says, it was because rules were breached, because they were able to be improvised in their decision making, that Apollo 13 was successfully recovered. Gene Kranz also talks about this, the need for a improvised approach and the fact that you never second guess people. Jerry Griffin makes the point that for a large part of most of the Apollo missions, the mission was run by 27-year-olds just out of school, just out of university, who in their area of expertise had to make calls on whether to go or not to go. And they weren't second guessed. So what we ask, well, it's the result of our research, the result of our analysis is that we believe that we can look at a new way of looking, certainly from the traditional way in the management accounting literature, of looking at control and creativity. In fact, we can have them both, not only simultaneously, but they are mutually reliant. Apollo 13 tells the story of different control options, different creativity options being used at different times in different parts of the organization as the need arose. Success was quite clearly required to exercise control as well as creativity. Our study has limitations. We're looking at documents which were written for different purposes and trying to draw inferences from them. Firstly, there's a possibility that we got things wrong, which is why we went to experts in the area, or people at least know things about space flight, defense, aeronautics, and so on. Secondly, we are, I guess, largely exploratory in what we're suggesting because we've just looked at one case study. One swallow doesn't make a summer. Can we generalize these findings of control and creativity and different styles across the board? We've yet to establish that. That is yet to be established. It requires more research to do so. And although we've got 4 nice boxes, we do need applications of this in a whole lot of different other settings before we can be dogmatic about it, I guess you'd say. Where do we go from here? There's other research, and in fact, my colleagues and myself are doing a lot of research in the area of space accounting, space and commerce. There's very definitely a need for it. And some of you will probably be involved, hopefully, in the research we're doing at the moment, as well as into the future. More about that later. I guess one of the things that, if you like, we take away from this, one of the takeaways is that neither sticking to the plan or this empowerment of employees willy-nilly is good enough to lead to successful outcomes. Different scenarios will require different responses, and the role is to work out which is the most appropriate response and creating the environment for that to happen, rather than be prescriptive about it. I'm not going to keep going on. In the genre of the times, I'd be interested in, we've got Jimi Hendrix getting some feedback. I'd be looking forward to getting the same from you, answering any questions and certainly listening to your thoughts as people who know a lot about space flight and space generally. Over to you.
Oh, thanks, Basil. That was fantastic. I did see your the original YouTube video, and I think that Michael or somebody will put the link up to that YouTube video in our chat area. But thank you so much. It was fascinating. We've got a couple of questions through on Slido. Nothing really specific on your presentation at this point, but I invite people to put those questions in now. I've got one myself. One of the things that was a takeaway for me was that after the Apollo 1 fire, I think Frank Borman summed up towards the end of the investigation is that the real failure there was the failure of imagination.
Mm.
And I think that's probably pretty common with a lot of space disasters and things that happen that you don't expect. You don't imagine that this series of events or these seemingly minor decisions will cause a problem. And I suppose this goes back to your theme here. But I suppose it also, not only in the case of Apollo 13, there was the real-time in-space decisions, but a lot of the things that they did or were able to do were thought about, considered, maybe even planned out prior to the mission. And then the people in real time said, hang on, what about that thing we did 6 months ago? Would that make sense to you?
Makes absolute sense, Peter. In fact, one of the things that's different about the Apollo 13 movie and what actually happened was that in the movie it was presented as though the working out how to adapt the command module scrubbers, air filters for the lunar module was something that had to be done on the spot. In actual fact, and Ken Mattingly talks about this and is quite explicit and direct about it. This had been simulated 2 years before. So they had to go back and they had to find the results of that simulation and recreate it with the things that were done, that things were available on the ship at the time, but it wasn't totally innovative. It had been done before, 2 years before.
Yeah, I think I read that. Actually, that brings me to one of the questions that Julian asked related to that. And I know the answer to this is that after the Apollo 13, did they change the scrubbers on the spacecraft to be compatible? I'm not sure whether you know the answer to that, Basil, but... Yeah,
they did.
They did?
Did,
yeah. Okay. I thought they didn't. I thought they just put extra scrubbers on because it was going to be too much engineering, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Oh, we've got another anonymous comment. Very insightful analysis. I don't know who that's from. It's by anonymous. Julian is alluded to. Wasn't there still a management issue going on in the shuttle era that came to the surface when they had the shuttle disasters? Well, I think that's well documented.
Yeah.
There were some management fails, certainly with Challenger, which almost were echoed in the Columbia disaster. So
it goes back to what you were saying before, Peter. I mean, it's always that part of the iceberg that you don't see that sinks the ship, isn't it? If we knew it was coming, we would be able to do things to, one, foresee it, and two, do something to prevent it. It's what we don't see that's going to take us out, and that's what happened here. Apollo 1, doors which open the wrong way. It's patently obvious now, but at the time, it's not patently obvious, unfortunately, with the tragic consequences.
Absolutely. Any other questions from anybody? Just
Basil, thank you very much. I've studied what may be the first vertical takeoff manned rocket disaster in the world, the flight of the Barkham Natter on the 1st of March 1945. I've looked very closely at this over the last 20 years or so. The creativity of the engineers was remarkable, and in a 12-month space of time, they had to develop the the manned vertical takeoff rocket. This was converted quite quickly into innovative ideas. The thing that really resulted in the disaster of the first manned vertical rocket flight was political interference. And I wondered, where does that fit into your spectrum of analysis?
It's a really good one, Brett. A very good question. And it's work that I'm doing at the moment, research I'm doing at the moment with a very good colleague and friend of mine at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Now, you'd know the word Huntsville to most of you will ring a few bells. That's where Wernher von Braun and his team were based. So they've got a very, very strong space presence in the universities there. And one of the things we're looking at was how come, if I can be crude, how come America won? Because the Russians, as you know, were the first in space. They were the first to go around to orbit the Earth, first woman in space, the first animal in space, the dog Laika. So what happened? And as far as we're still in the middle of the research, but from what we can ascertain, it was the death of Sergei Korolev that led to the demise, if you like, was instrumental, shall we say, in the demise of the Soviet space program. Because had they continued as they were going, they would almost certainly have gotten to the moon first, according to us, from what we can ascertain. Now, as I say, we haven't finished the research yet. But so, okay, their top rocket designer, the chief designer, dies. The equivalent of Wernher von Braun dies. So what? Well, the so what was that there was political interference and political games going on in, if you like, filling the vacuum. And that severely curtailed the Soviet space efforts, resulting in a lot of problems, culminating, I think, was it January 1969, the N1 rocket that exploded and was unmanned, but took out the launch pad, took out like everything, and effectively put paid to the Soviet moonshot. I don't know if I answer your question.
Thank you.
Sure, the answer is yes. Political interference, political machinations, institutional factors, very, very powerful.
Well, I think going up to Apollo 12 when they decided to launch in a storm with Nixon at their pad.
Yeah.
I mean, probably in normal circumstances they wouldn't have done that. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, the lightning hitting the spacecraft and the need to reboot everything, and John Aaron's work in that was, again, creativity. This is the ability to do something that's that works, that seems to work. It's unplanned, it's unscheduled. I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn in today's environment, in today's COVID environment from Apollo 13, where we need to be creative, where things are unprecedented, where things are out of our control, and we need a problem.
We need a giant scrubber is what we need.
I think we've got 3, haven't we? But it seems to be on the agenda. But that's medical stuff is out of my jurisdiction.
For sure. Our Russian expert, Igor Rozenberg, who's going to be presenting shortly, has sent me his email address. Would like to have a chat with you after tonight, just about the Soviet moon program, if you're interested.
I'm very interested.
And I'm not sure if you're going to plan to stay around or not, but he's going to be coming up next. I'm just going through some other questions here. Right. So you said you presented at NASA, and I saw you at that presentation. Did you get some good feedback and contact and clarifications or illuminations from that presentation?
Yes, Peter. I mean, my job, my aim in presenting at NASA was not to obviously go there and say, Hello guys, I'm from Australia and I'm coming here to tell you all about Apollo 13. It was to learn. It was over, what, 50 odd people who were good enough to come. It was winter, but come to the presentation on a Monday morning. And they were very complimentary, very kind, very generous in their suggestions, which we did incorporate into the revisions to our paper, which was then within a month resubmitted and led to the final publication of it, which we were notified of about a month ago.
All right. I mean, obviously got no first-hand experience, but you do get the impression from the missions and the people involved that the structure of mission control, for example, is hierarchical, but still very even-handed and collaborative. Okay, you got the flight director and the guys in charge, but it appears that they all take a back seat to an expert and then bounce those ideas around to get consensus on what to do to go forward, which strikes me as a nice balance of creativity and structure in your definition there. But sure, there's a lot of lessons that could be learned and continue to be learned as we go forward. Yeah,
I mean, Gene Kranz talks about it in his book, Failure is Not an Option. Most of you would have read the book. And yes, the idea of taking his team of the 4 teams that were around the clock looking at managing the mission, the Apollo 13 mission, taking one offline purely to brainstorm was very much along the lines of what you're suggesting, Peter. Very much so. And the idea was not to evaluate it, but to just create an environment where people could come up with ideas which may or may not work. As Jim Lovell said, you could get frustrated, you can get angry, you can get disappointed, you can get depressed, you could bounce around the walls of the spacecraft, but when you finished all that, you still got to solve the problem, work the problem. I think, as I said, we can learn a lot about that in these current difficult times. And you guys in Melbourne are probably experts at that. Certainly in Australia you are. No question about it.
We've just got time for one more, but what I thought I'd do, Mike Dean, if you're able to unmute yourself, for your information, Basil, Mike Dean is a retired Apollo tracker who was a deputy director at Honeysuckle Creek and then later the director of Tidbinbilla Tracking Station in Australia here. And he and his team worked Apollo 13 on all the Apollo missions. And he's messaged me saying that there was an Australian dimension. Mike, I'm not sure whether you're able to either unmute yourself or write me a note to...
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Got you. Go ahead.
Okay, Basil. There were rather a large number of us actively involved in Apollo 13. Bruce Window is on with me tonight as well. I was running the operations at Honeysuckle through most of these major events, and there are a lot of lessons learned there. The big lesson was, and I don't know how you replicate it today, was the flexibility of the analog equipment. Now, when I hear people heading towards the moon with a modern suite of software and hardware, and I go out to Tidbinbilla and find there's one person looking after 3 complexes, that flexibility, you have the beauty of having individuals who knew what they were doing, allowed us to cope. I don't know if it could have been coped with in today's attitude. So flexibility is a significant factor that only comes really from people, or else you spend a fortune programming your software, hopefully taking account of what if. And by the way, there was a great deal of planning we used to do pre-mission. My major job was to think through what if this, that, and the other. And we'd had a bit of experience. And in fact, I was specifically asked before Apollo 13, what happens if they turn the LEM on at the same time as the IU? I said, well, shouldn't be any great problem because we've just coped with it at Tibimbilla on Surveyor. Surveyor, there was a possibility of 2 being on the moon at the same time on the same frequency. So we worked up simulations and procedures at Tibimbilla. So people were the major creative elements in all this. And if ever you want to talk further about it, Basil, you're welcome to contact me.
Thank you, Mike.
By the way, Bruce Window led the team that rushed to Parkes. And it wasn't just us at Honeysuckle, by the way. It was an enormous Australian effort. Microwave links had to be put in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter. Everybody in OTC, PMG, anybody who had anything to contribute was actively involved. And so there is a lot that I guess has never been documented. That's all.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'll do that, Basil. I'll pass Mike's details on to you after the meeting tonight.
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I don't know, Pete, if you just give Bruce Window a 30 seconds to get he played a major part.
Oh, yes, of course.
Parkes and getting the Parkes thing going. Is Bruce still on?
Thank you. Hear me?
Yes, got you, Bruce. How are you, Bruce? Good to see you.
Yeah, great. One of the points I'd make is the deep technical knowledge that people had of the systems. They, as Mike mentioned, with one person covering a whole range as they do at Tibimbilla today, that knowledge would be skin deep. We all had a very deep technical knowledge of our systems and a fair knowledge of the spacecraft. With respect to Parkes, there was a fair amount of ad-libbing that went on to get the thing configured. We relied heavily on the CSIRO for what they could do in the short time frame that was available. They got the front end configured for Apollo in about 6 hours, where normally it would take them a day. It's just innovation because of individual people's technical knowledge. We relied on the CSIRO for that front end part of it. I probably don't need to add any more, except that Mike mentioned about simulations. One of the simulations we did was having, exactly as Mike said, 2 vehicles on the same frequency. And we had figured out how to drag one away. You had to get the other one turned off. And that was where Houston had to be convinced to tell the Astros, turn off the LEM so that we can drag the IU away. It was all
the instrument unit, yeah.
It was all, well, simulations, thinking, creativity. That's enough. Thank you.
Fantastic, Bruce. Really appreciate that. So listen, yeah, I'll send both Bruce and Mike's details along with Igor's details to you, Basil.
Thanks,
Look,
yeah.
Listen, thank you for that. It was fantastic. I really appreciate it and taking your time out to join us. Just in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on. I'm going to hand over to our last presenter, Igor Rozenberg. He's a member of the Space Association, and he's going to give us an overview of the Russian moon program. Are you there, Igor?
Mars program, not moon program. It's a Mars one.
On Mars one, I do apologize. Sorry.
Close enough.
We get multiple screens here. Okay, so I will mute myself and hand you the screen so you go ahead and share away. Thanks, Igor.
Try. Could you see my screen now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, just hold on. I do apologize if I offended by non-political version of word manned mission to Mars. Unfortunately for those people who could be offended, I'm using classical established terminology, and trust me, even in Russian literature, it's still referring as a manned mission. Valentina Tereshkova, first female in space, still was launched on man-rated vehicles. So I do apologize in advance if I offended some feelings here. I don't believe it's a critical, but for some people it's more sensitive than others. So what I'm trying to present today, my name Igor Rozenberg. Yeah, I'm, like Peter introduced me, I'm a local resident expert on Soviet and Russian space program. And today I try to present history and perspectives of the Russian manned mission to Mars from Soviet and Russian point of view. By the way, feel free to raise hand if you have, or ask me if you have any pressing question. I dedicated 10 minutes of my presentation to Q&A session, but sometime you can have an itch to ask something and forget for later on. Just raise a hand or ping me. Russian and Soviet history was quite difficult road to Mars. USSR has a big story, a huge story of success with Venus and not so good track record with the exploration of the Mars. One of the reasons for this, as you can see, there are two programs, Mars and Phobos, and half of the stuff marked in red. I would not go for this, but it simply highlights the reliability of robotic spacecraft launched at that time. And this list actually does not include all accidents and catastrophes happened with launches of Martian probes, or cases when Martian probe simply did not reach Earth's orbit. This was post-orbit flights, which, as you can see, half of them in red, meaning that they were either catastrophic or partially successful. The major reason for this bad record, I believe, it's historical. It's topic for another fascinating conversation, but in 50s, in the end of 40s, beginning of 50s, cybernetic as a science was labeled as a Western and anti-communist one. As a result, it was a lot of problems with Russians always had problems with the control system as a result of this idiotic political influence. Like I said, it's completely other story. Russian footprint on the Mars mission unfortunately followed Soviet fleet. In November of 1996, Mars 96 probe even did not reach orbit and splashed somewhere between Pacific. It was huge scare because it was some equipment which has radioactive on board. Probably first successful Russian record for Mars exploration was launch of European Mars Express orbiter, which was delivered in 2003. In November 2011, it was failure with the Phobos ground sample return mission. Again, the same problem, untested platform, rocket launch station to orbit, and station did not get ignition to transfer it to trans-Martian trajectory. In 2006, Roscosmos took torch from NASA and cooperated with European and delivered ExoMars Phase 1 orbiter, successful orbiter. Failure to land has nothing to do with the Russian space program because it was, I believe it was Italian spacecraft, and Russians only supply some instrument on board. We're waiting with anticipation 2022 delayed European Roscosmos mission, because in this case, Russia provided landed platform. It really would give them a quite significant advantage if they successfully would manage to launch a European rover on Mars. And to follow up failed Phobos ground program, there is a chance that we will see second iteration. By some ironical reason, they call Phobos sample return mission as a boomerang. So there is an Australian connection. Despite the fact that Soviet Union has a lot of failures, some of failures actually became first in space. For instance, 1963 flyby mission was complete failure, but it was first man-manned object which performed Mars flyby, reaching distance of less than 2,000 kilometers. In 1971, Mars 2 achieved hard landing, beating NASA in this GPL in this process. In 1971, Mars 3 station achieved Mars soft landing, even it worked like 15 seconds on the surface of Mars. And in 1989, the last one of the last deep space achievement, Soviet station Phobos 2 managed to fly by near Phobos a distance of 191 kilometers. I believe this record is still not beaten. Even it did not complete program which is supposed to land on this particular moon of Mars. Why I'm telling you about robotic programs? Probably because Soviet and Russian did not have much chance with the robotic programs. They did not risk to send people, human crew, to Mars, even if they have capabilities of doing such things. So why we did not reach Mars at all? First of all, because Soviet space program became a loser in moon race. Government became a little bit more cold to the space exploration after Khrushchev has been dismissed from the office, and look at the whole endeavor as a very expensive one. So with a lack of political will, low reliability of the hardware, especially with electronics and cybernetics, there were some challenges with docking procedures. Don't forget, a trip to Mars required in magnitude longer missions and even mission to Moon. We talk about months and years rather than days and weeks. Problem is radiation, and it was a huge commitment, and this is why people were so excited about moon landing. They were really hoping that around 1980 we would have a Martian mission. Okay, this is one of the few projects which has been developed by Soviet Union. Interestingly, they tried to do different architectures with the nuclear propulsion, with the solar panels, with a huge kind of Martian expedition complex. If you look at the picture to the right, it probably resembles your Apollo Saturn 4 mission with the Martian and Venus flyby. And you're probably right, because before even NASA created Apollo applications, in 1963, two groups in study to do similar mission, even named MAVR, meaning two characters from Mars, and VR, two characters from Venus. Originally, it's supposed to be just flyby mission with existing hardware capability. On the left side, you can see analog of Orion when they try to use nuclear blast to make one trip to the Mars, and probably the most studied version of Martian expedition complex was 1987 study by Energia, the Korolev firm. So there were multiple research study, but in reality, all of them were dependent on one big thing, and one big thing only: the lack of proper launch vehicle which allow Martian mission to be assembled on the Earth's orbit in first place. So let's talk about Russian launch vehicles. Soyuz has at the time around 7 tons to low Earth orbit. Proton, which was certified only in 1977, was considered as a non-reliable vehicle, not suitable for man, was not certified as a man-rated vehicle. And N1 rocket, which was supposed to bring Russia to the moon, you would be surprised. It originally was envisioned as a Martian launch vehicle. So in worst case configuration, it's supposed to bring 38-45 tons to trajectory to trans-Martian injection trajectory. 45,000. We still don't have so far rockets with this capability. Unfortunately, all 4 launches were catastrophic. It never became space-worthy, and the whole project was cancelled in 1974. More successful Energia launch vehicle was funded by Russian Department of Defense. It was a jerky reaction to build a symmetrical answer to a space transportation system built by NASA, which we call simply Space Shuttle. Payload to low Earth orbit of this vehicle was approximately 100 tons, and it could deliver it with a proper hydrogen oxygen space stack, approximately 28 tons to the same trajectory, to the Mars. The difference, it's by original design, it was supposed to be either manned vehicle or cargo vehicle. Rocket has been launched only twice. First time was rocket executed flawlessly, but payload failed to provide right orientation, and mission was catastrophic because payload finished to splash in Pacific Ocean. Second launch we celebrated just this month, 32nd anniversary of the flight of Buran, but unlike space transportation system, Buran has a launch vehicle, Energia, which was suitable for interplanetary mission and including interplanetary mission to Mars. Another project, they tried to build a fully reusable space shuttle mission when even boosters would fly back. It's called vertical launch, vertical landing, fully automated reusable system with approximately 11, slightly above 11 tons to trans-Martian injection trajectory. Never flew. And this was fully not reusable, just single-use system. And it has whopping 52,000 tons to trans-Martian injection trajectory. With this vehicle, it was last vehicle designed by Glushko, Soviet Union probably could afford to have not just flying by around Mars, not just establishing a human base on Phobos, not just entering orbit around Mars, which were precursor mission to the holy grail of the human Mars exploration, finally put boots on the Mars. And you can see them. So, like I said, the most advanced study was made by Energia. It's called Martian Expedition Complex 1987, nuclear propelled space tech include nuclear propelled spaceship with the 2 reactors and with the electrical engines. I will share this presentation with you. I would not have time probably to acknowledge all specification, but it probably was the most developed project during Soviet time. It will require it to launch 5 rockets of Energia with the different parts to assemble this stack on low Earth orbit. So Russian Martian plans, like I said, it started very bad with failure of Mars 1996, but it kicks off after NASA, President Bush declared Constellation project for Earth, Moon, Mars program, which has been cancelled by next president, and European Aurora program. So it was actually quite serious preparation because of these 2 programs. You can see what they planned for landing on the Mars, working on the Mars, and traveling to the Mars. Again, I would not have time. I will share this presentation with you, and there is a reference book in the end of my presentation. One of the biggest obstacles, which I mentioned, to the flying to the Mars, and why we didn't even see a flyby mission, neither by Russians or Americans during 70s, it was sheer duration. In 1971, a crew of Salyut 1 established a record of 23 days. By the way, this is Russian diagram, and obviously what is missing here, it's a 3 mission from Skylab. As you can see, how many days, which Russians managed to beat only around 1977 on Salyut 6 mission. So far, humanity have experienced to put people like US astronaut called spam in the can, and people spent about 400 days on board of the spacecraft, even it was flying around the Earth, but it's a reasonable amount of number of days which would be suitable for manned mission to Mars. So one of the reasons why Russians invested so much into simulation program since end of 60 and developing orbital station, it was stepping stone to the way to Mars. After NASA announced Jupiter Ice Moon Orbiter mission in 2003, this project was focus of attention by Russian Department of Defense, and I will explain you why. Even project was cancelled, Russians started to do some activity in this area. Prior to this, there were already some nuclear technologies in space exploration like RTG, which is a passive, it's not nuclear reactor, it's called radioisotope thermonuclear generator, when electricity would be generated based on the decay of radioactive elements. Russian has infamous and with a bad reputation book Nuclear Reactor, sorry, misspelling, Legend, program runs from 1969 till 1988. One of the reactor, because of failure of engine, and it did not move to the graveyard orbit. Instead of this, it was a flying Chernobyl when it polluted a lot of territory over Canada. There were over 8 different mishaps with this kind of reactors. The Soviets developed later Topaz class reactor, which was a little bit more compact, and UniSA reactors. Both of these were shared with United States after USSR disintegrated in 90s. And believe me or not, but this is analog of the US NERVA nuclear thermal propulsion engine. Never flew in the test, even was fully tested on the ground. So as you can see, there are traces of nuclear application in space exploration. Unfortunately, in these days, I believe UN have a resolution not after these accidents with the nuclear station on ground and few incidents in space, there is a UN resolution which will prohibit using of such technology in outer space. And in September, it was a news about transportation and energy model, thermonuclear space tech. Again, I wouldn't have time to go through all specification. It's a multi-use, multiple-purpose space tech. It can be used for manned and unmanned mission. Development started in 2010. It's a joint venture between 2 Russian corporations, Rosatom, who is responsible for nuclear energy, and Roscosmos, who is going to deliver this device. As you can see on the screen, how it's deployed on orbit, it's using some kind of special truss, expandable, it's using nuclear reaction, and you can see these white panels. It's a panels which supposed to provide proper thermal modes, so nuclear by emitting excessive heat into the space. It's using it's called droplets kind of cooling system, and you can see this device in fully extended operational state. On the right picture, you can see 4 ion-based electric engines. Nuclear reactor would produce electricity. In space, worthy in standard baseline scenario, it's supposed to be 1 megawatt device. Russians already propose missions which call Nucleon. It probably would be demonstrator, but in 2030, they're going to send it to the moon, moving it to Venus and moving eventually to Jupiter system, and they will use orbiters dropped from this space tug around Moon, Venus, and Jupiter. And if you believe it's only nice pictures, think again. This is photos from the real hardware, which has already started to be manufactured by Arsenal plant in St. Petersburg. As you can see real hardware. This is propulsion engine. Again, you can see specifications. Engine was tested in vacuum condition on ground already, I believe, a couple of years ago. This is how it can be used. It definitely could be used as an interorbital space tug. It should be used as interplanetary space tug. When I talk about interorbital, it probably would be used for 15 years, moving back and forward from low Earth orbit to geostationary orbit. And most importantly, it could be used as interplanetary relay station to provide 24/7 line of communication, even in worst case scenario when we're talking about moon and Mars exploration. Obviously, behind the scene, there is a big funding from Department of Defense. We need to have a technically unlimited amount of power, as said, deployed anywhere they would like. Like I said, it's a baby of 2 Russian corporations, Roscosmos and Rosatom, and the leading company is Energia, SNIMASH, which is the think tank of Russian space program, and Keldysh Center, which actually developed these engines. Rosatom responsible for development and production of nuclear reactor, and whole testing of engine has been done in Машиностроение NPO. It's actually Chelomey company who designed originally Proton launch vehicle. Again, it's quite substantial amount of money considering the Russian space program only 1/12 of gauge funding, 1/12 of NASA. If you ask me why it will take so long if they started to produce some hardware, I have no idea. They're probably not in a hurry, and they rather try to create a reliable long-term system rather than push something quickly. Apparently, I believe, and whatever I read about expert opinion, this is ultimate Russian answer for Elon Musk Starship, because this spacecraft ultimately will require it. It's multi-use. It's a space-based asset which will be in use, let's say, in 15 to 30 years, and it will satisfy a lot of requirements on for Earth's moon and Earth's Mars transportation, at least in nearest 50 years. Now, if you would like to know more, there is a very interesting book. It's a memoir of the Russian robotic space program, published surprisingly by NASA Historical Office. It's called The Difficult Road to Mars, which giving you in details history, which was briefly mentioned on slide 2. Unfortunately, everything else mostly done in Russian, printed in Russian, except Anatoly Zak book, which has dedicated whole chapter to Mars exploration in his book, Russian Space. This is 3 major Russian sources. Bugrov was peer and colleague of Sergei Korolev, and he wrote a book of memoirs which calls the Korolev Martian Project. In 2006, Russian Academy of Cosmonautics published book in Russian, Manned Mission to Mars. I was actually proud to present this book to Robert Zubrin, and he was not even aware it existed because it never was translated to English. And Moon, a stepping stone to solar system exploration, written by two authors from Energia, each has some references to Mars, to Manned Mars mission as well. This guy is, I highly recommend, if you're interested by articles, this guy is from Russian company which is called Cryogenmash. His name Dmitry Kononenkin. He started to collect all information about space tech, which was, information was on surface, but you simply have to add 2 + 2 to understand that it became a major strategic way for Russian space program probably for the next 25 years. And on the right, you can see one of the impression how Soviet and Russian crew can land on Mars in 1980. Probably in different reality, not in our lifetime. Yep, I'm opening floor for your questions, and I would be gladly to answer them.
Thanks, Igor. I haven't got any questions come through yet on the Slido or the chat, but my question to you is, what, if any, cooperation are these Russian? So is this Roscosmos, or is this a conglomeration of Russian independent aerospace companies?
There is no such thing as a Russian independent space company. Everything belongs to Roscosmos. So right. Roscosmos is a one super Tsar whole state corporation, which include manufacturers of engines, manufacturers of rockets, manufacturers of spacecraft. So this is one big. The whole project, transportation and energy module, is a baby of two Russian corporations: Space Corporation, Roscosmos, and Atomic Energy Corporation, which called Rosatom.
And are they coordinating, cooperating, or completely going separate ways?
No.
To Americans, or?
I don't believe anything happened with US at the time, because we have a very bad Russia has very bad relationships. They're still cooperating on International Space Station program. As far as I know, Russia did not join, unlike Ukraine, Russia did not join Artemis Accords. So, and let's start the head of Russian space agency, Dmitry Rogozin, is sanctioned, and he doesn't have a right to visit the United States. So,
and I think Donald Trump owes me a few $1 million as well.
I don't believe it would be a healthy relationship if heads of space agency cannot visit each other. I did not see it even during Cold War.
Right. So you think they're going to be doing a completely independent program? And you said that some of the hardware was being built.
Yes.
Did you say that was in the US?
No, it was not in the US. Arsenal is a St. Petersburg company in Russia. It was not built. It was not built in the US.
I thought you said the San Pedro or somewhere like that. Okay.
No, not San Pedro. It's St. Petersburg. I'm sorry.
Oh, St. Petersburg. Oh, I see.
St. Petersburg. There is St. Petersburg in the United States and Florida, but this is the regional one in Russia.
Yeah. So a comment from Stephen: seems like the Russian Mars efforts were better defined in terms of vehicle development than the US manned Mars program. I guess is that a fairly accurate statement?
Could you repeat this? I didn't get it completely.
Steve Humble sort of made the comment that it seemed like the Russian Mars efforts were better defined in terms of vehicle development than the manned Mars program by the US. Okay,
we're not comparing apples with apples. How you can compare robotic mission with a manned mission? What I can tell you, Russians were much more successful in Venus exploration. even they tried to reuse the same Venus platform because of sheer number of days when they have to reach Mars, just prove how their electronic and guidance system were not reliable. Plus, it was element of luck, I believe, and they actually abandoned whole Mars program around 1975. So it was, yep.
I'm not sure where Stephen's still on here, but I think what you might be referring to is the forward plans, the plans now that the Americans have and that the Russians have that you showed us.
Current Russian plans actually is cooperation with Europeans on 2 missions, and Russia could come back. You can call it return to Mars. It will be successful return to Mars exploration if they manage to pull rabbit out of the hat in 2022, because they develop lander platform, and success of whole mission dependent on this piece of hardware.
Actually, Michael Abdullah has done some research. Apparently, Ukraine became the 9th signatory to the Artemis Accords in November of this year.
Yeah,
November
I mentioned
13th.
this.
Yeah,
Russia
okay,
did not join, Ukraine joined. Yeah,
that's right. Well, that's terrific. Okay.
So,
oh, who's that?
Sorry, it's me.
Yes, Julian.
Yeah. So could this be then a prelude to another space race, but then to Mars, if Russian is going on their own with all this development?
I don't believe we're talking about politically motivated space race in these days. I believe they are developing, they're successfully developing so far, with maybe this little bit slower pace than I would expect it. They're developing a fully sustainable, economically viable transportation system. If they would have system like this, they can economically beat Starship, because Starship consume a lot of fuel comparing with this architecture.
Yeah.
Plus, they don't need to launch everything from Earth. They would have a space-based asset, which actually designed to move from point A to point B multiple times.
Yeah. So this is just like another commercial market, rather than just offering the moon. Russia is looking one step ahead and going, okay, well, we can do Mars as well.
I believe it's a classical way what they did for last 20 years. They just became an international taxi driver. In this case, exactly. They would become international truck drivers.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much, Igor. That's a very good presentation.
Yeah, very good. Listen, what I might do now, I might open the floor up, and I'm not sure if Marcus is still with us. I think he is. There was quite a couple of questions that came through, and we sort of skipped over them because we wanted to keep on track. If you're still there, Marcus, Julian, there you go. While the tiles fastening system on the Starship is being pinned, when the pins melt and loosen the tiles, hence they used adhesive.
Yes, I am still here. Yeah, that's a really good question. And we can actually see from several tests that they've done with the Starship that they've attempted both. They've actually done them in parallel almost, and there's a few images. I can't see them here right now. They're in the archive here somewhere, but there's some there that they've tried to attach with more of an adhesive, and they've shown to crack as well. But they're still going for this pinned method of doing it. The pins, from what I understand, are made of the same sort of steel, this 304 stainless, I think it is, and that's got all sorts of quite incredible temperature. It only melts at very high temperatures and that sort of thing. So the idea is that the heat shield tiles would sit in front in some sort of pin sort of setup, and would flow through the upper atmosphere at orbital velocities to burn off a lot of that heat, or dissipate a lot of that heat and drag. And what it would do is some of the heat would be transferred through to the pins, but the idea is that there would be, because of that grade of stainless steel, that the heat would be able to be dissipated through the body quite quickly. So I'm not a huge expert in the in the elements that they're using there, but a lot of the stuff they've done in testing indicates that it should be able to achieve that, especially if you've got a little bit of cryogenic fuel still in the body to also absorb some of the heat. So, but yes, the idea is that the heat shield tires would take the vast majority of that.
So the cracking you mentioned, Marcus, is that just simply a result of the cryogenic fueling and the cracking of the temperature and the expansion of this? Because they haven't done any atmospheric re-entry testing with those tiles.
No, they have done some tests in that they've had some of the heat shield tiles on some Dragon capsules just as a test. And I haven't really seen anything official about how those tests went. And this is the same form of tile that they're attempting to use now. I think the reason they're cracking at the moment is more due to the way they're being attached, and also just the vibration and that sort of stuff that's going on when these things are launching, because it's quite violent, obviously. So the idea, of course, is that they're supposed to be being attached with a very robotic kind of method. So where the shuttle had, almost an insane number of slightly different shaped tiles to all fit together. And if you have a look at the nose of one of the old shuttles at any point, you'll see that there was almost no two tiles the same. So the labor was so intensive in that it was insane. The idea of this is that it would be fitted almost robotically with these much smaller hexagonal sort of tiles that just sort of fit in like a jigsaw. And there's sort of slight gaps between them as well. So the idea is that there's still quite an amount of heat that will sort of get through there. But I guess the idea is that it reflects a good, high percentage of it, so that the body itself is taking a lot less of that heat and temperature.
Sure.
So,
Rob asked a question: as costs go down, do you see established launch providers other than SpaceX going out of business, or will governments keep providing financial support? I guess it's always the question,
it is always the question. I mean, at the moment, Falcon 9 alone, which is obviously considerably cheaper than the majority of launch vehicles, is already starting to have quite an impact around the world. You've only got to look at the number of launches that are going on right now. And even NASA, as you said earlier, NASA are now looking at reusing Falcon 9s even on crew rockets, which they had said for quite a long time that they had no intention of doing. And after, essentially a couple of demo flights, they were quite happy to start reducing the costs and starting to reuse those. So that's interesting in itself, I think, looking at what's happening with Falcon 9. So that question could almost be applied to Falcon 9. Starship at the moment is a little bit of an interesting one. In, I guess you could still call it a little bit of a long shot to in some aspects. Like there's still a lot of issues.
A little bit of long shot, to be honest.
Yeah, there's still a lot of issues to solve with that. Heat shielding is just one of them, and that's something that hasn't really been touched on too much yet. Refueling is another one, and I've actually got an episode coming out in the next few days about refueling. If that actually is possible to do in the way they want to do it, then that could potentially lower that cost to orders of magnitude even lower again. So there's so much to still do, and getting to orbit really is just the first part. Can they get one back, and can they refuel it? And keeping in mind that the payload capability of one of these is estimated to be around the 150-ish tons to orbit, which is probably a stretch goal as well. And to fuel up one of these starships in orbit, to 100% refuel it up, I think it would take somewhere around 9 or 10 different launches to actually transfer that fuel. So that's no small thing. When you look at the size of the Starship, it's just massive. It's just absolutely massive. So, and full of liquid oxygen, liquid methane. So, the amount of fuel just to refuel one Starship in orbit is an astronomical amount of methane to either be if the intention, of course, is to pull it from the atmosphere at some point. That is a long way from being possible right now. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know if I actually answered any question.
No, I think it's good. I think it's it's a rhetorical question. You know, what will happen? And once again, we've got a lot of history of governments around the world supporting businesses that aren't sustainable just because of the
look, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. I mean, if it's possible to do what they're aiming to do, and you know, I have learnt not to write Elon Musk and SpaceX off, because I've been pretty skeptical about a number of things. I remember being very skeptical that they would actually land one of these Falcon 9s in the ocean back in the day. I was hoping that they would be able to do it, but I was skeptical at the same time. And whenever I am unsure, and you know, it doesn't matter whether we're talking SpaceX or something like Tesla, where they seem to, you know, get past all the odds in some way. So it's going to be interesting to see. But if
nice
it is
possible
possible
on the way though, which is always entertaining.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But you know, if it is possible to do what they want to do, and it's possible to launch one of these starships 150 tons to orbit and back again for basically the cost of fuel with almost no refurbishment, that's going to be something else. And that will certainly have an impact on all other rocket providers, I would think, all other launch providers.
Indeed. Anonymous has asked just a general question about will we be doing Zoom meetings from the pub next year for those people who can't get to Melbourne? So the answer is kind of yes. Our meetings prior to going into COVID, we were live streaming via YouTube. We've started using Zoom for the virtual meetings, and the hope, the intention, the expectation is that we will start using Zoom for the very reason it's more interactive. However, the particular venue that we do use has limited bandwidth down there. So actually our IT guy is hammering away with some options. So watch this space. We will be streaming in some capacity. It just matter which platform we'll be using. We'll let you know. And another unrelated post here from Jackie Carpenter up in New South Wales. Her organisation, One Giant Leap Australia Foundation, they've got this program where they have wattle seeds flown up to space, Australian wattle seeds flown up to space, and they will be then returned and distributed down to schools and things in Australia. But what she's saying on the SpaceX 21 early December mission, and Soichi Noguchi will be doing, they're flying some these seeds up. We'll be doing some Asia Herbs in Space experiment on the ISS, working with her wattle seed. So that's something to watch out for. And if you go to One Giant Leap Australia, you can find all about what they do. They're a pretty incredible bunch of people up there, and they run space camps. Well, when you used to be able to travel overseas, but also they run educational programs in schools and other things, and supporting students in the STEM area. So Jackie Carpenter and her husband Bob run that. That's kind of about it as far as I could see from the questions. Oh, John Lee, regarding the small Russian space budget, Igor, the purchasing power parity of the ruble is 25. So the small budget goes a long way in Russia. Does that make sense to you?
It's approximately 1/12 of the budget of NASA, but you're not counting because they have different target programs, plus they obviously have a black budget from Department of Defense, which never was revealed. So I don't know. It's obviously not 1-to-1. I would estimate it's approximately, I don't know, at least 10-15% of US budget.
Right. But I guess what he's saying is the purchasing power within Russia is different. So the number might be much smaller and the proportion of GDP, but what you can get for that spend is different.
It depends on economical effectiveness of investing in space technology. Apparently, if you look at the Indian spacecraft, I remember it was interesting numbers that amount of money India spent to send orbiter to the Mars was less than creating of one Martian movie.
Yeah, that's right. The movie
Yeah.
The Martian. Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's not actually, again, you're not comparing apples with apples.
Yeah, sure. All right, that's all that I've got here as far as written questions. If anyone wants to unmute themselves, provided you behave yourself, go ahead and ask a question, make a comment, raise a new subject completely. You're more than welcome to do so. Well, I'll take my jacket off because it's getting too hot here in Melbourne because it's so tropical. By the way, I've got my Apollo 11 shirt on. Yeah. So Ian, you asked about the AGM. I'm not sure whether that answered your question. I can't see John Coleman online. So I suspect he's not here.
Yeah, what I was leading up to, Peter, was for the sake of protecting our treasurer and our members and everything else, perhaps we should just deal with very quickly online or something with a couple of legal issues relating to passing the accounts for the year and things like that, just so they can be passed off as cited and everything else. Perhaps your president's report and something like that, those sorts of things that go out by email and just very quick meetings. So yes, reports are accepted, financials are accepted. The existing committee is retained for another 12 months or something like that. End of story. Just to cover it off legally. That was all I was getting at.
Yeah, no, that's probably a good point. I mean, part of the limitation that we had obviously was if we were going to have any particular subjects or topics that needed to be decided by a vote, having it virtually did not allow scrutiny, I'm saying like Donald Trump now, of that vote. So it could be rigged and robbed from whoever was putting up the proposal or whoever's nominating for the position. But so the committee basically came to the conclusion that we should wait till we have a physical meeting. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense from the financials perspective. If that's something that we do need to do, I'll raise a question within the committee and get John Coleman involved in that, and maybe that is something we could or should do by the end of the year. Because the end of the year is in the financial year for the association, by the way, too.
Yeah, well, it's as much a protection for the treasurer or anything else like that sort of thing. Have been involved in a couple of those sorts of issues in the past, and yes, it's a wise move to get it all signed off. It's just not left in abeyance.
Yeah, all right, we'll take that on board, Ian. Thanks for that. All right, how's everyone doing? Good night tonight? I think it was good.
Yeah, are you flying again, Peter?
I am.
Oh, good.
Yeah, getting bits and pieces. I've got a full roster now, so it's encouraging. Obviously, you've seen the news. They've opened the borders with New South Wales.
Yeah.
We're just waiting on those pineapple people to open their borders, and at least we'll have the East Coast to fly around. WA is a bit of a hard case, I think, but you know.
And from your point of view, how's Jetstar looking now?
Well, I'm with Virgin, so I don't really care what how Jetstar's looking. Yeah. We've been recording up till now, so we'll go ahead and just kill off the recording. Thank you, everyone. We'll stay online.